Hello and welcome back to the Movie Memo Recaps. Today we are going to recap a 2013 movie titled Vendetta. Please be advised that there might be spoilers ahead. In the opening scene, we are introduced to George Vickers and Sandra Vickers, who are eagerly waiting for their son, Jimmy, to return home. Both of them can't wait for Jimmy to get home, and his father offers to mow the yard when he returns later. On the other hand, 4 gang members are planning a robbery. One of them assures them that their next target is on a daily money run. Then we witness a girl leave the building after withdrawing money from the bank. The thugs become alarmed, put on rabbit masks, and pursue the girl's car. The criminals eventually stop the girl at the end of the road and remove her from her car. One gang member searches the car but can't find the money. And then, George, who happens to be driving by, pulls over and promptly arrives at the scene. The goons order George to go, and one of them smacks him with a baseball bat. However, George punches him and breaks his head open. Then he turns to the rest of them and begs them to leave. One of the members waves a knife at George to warn him, but they eventually escape the location after hearing the police siren. Soon, the police arrive on the scene. In his statement, George tells the police that he only intended to stop him and had no intention of killing him. Chief Inspector Holland sarcastically comments, "You should have considered that before striking the baseball bat." George is arrested on suspicion of manslaughter. Later that day, the surviving 3 thugs approach their leader, Warren, and explain that the theft did not proceed as planned. When Warren inquires about his brother, he is stunned to learn of his death. Warren, enraged by his brother's loss, instructs the gangsters not to return until George is dead. When George comes home after securing bail, the goons, including Warren, pursue him and knock on his door. 2 men approach the front door and knock, while the other 2 move around the rear of the home. One of them then threatens to assault Sandra. The same goon who pointed the knife at George tells him that he shouldn't have acted like a hero that day while holding him against a wall. The criminals then tie the couple to a chair in the garage and pour petrol on them. Warren sets fire to the room and kills the couple as they whimper. The scene then shifts to a car, where protagonist, Jimmy Vickers, a special operations interrogation officer, is listening to a voicemail from his friend Griffin, who soothes him and expresses his sorrow at the loss. Later on, Jimmy visits a bar. He then turns to Debs and Terry, the owners, for information about his parents' death. Terry denies having any information, but Jimmy claims Terry leaves barely 50 yards from Jimmy's parents' house, allowing him to hear their screams. Terry becomes dissatisfied and tells Jimmy to leave if he is here to cause trouble. Jimmy, depressed and outraged at what's happening, grabs Terry by the collar and punches him before Debs stops him and asks Terry to tell him what he knows. Terry finally tells Jimmy about calling the fire department that night, and he claims to have spotted 4 of the gang members. They broke into the house, and he heard Jimmy's father scream, but he merely watched from the window because he was afraid to intervene. The facts so far are mounting up, and we later see Jimmy in the burning garage at the house where his parents were allegedly murdered. He looks around and remembers his mother and father from an old photograph he discovered in the room. Griffin, Jimmy's police acquaintance, arrives and informs him that one of the neighbors spotted a black BMW speeding about 11 p.m. on the same night, but they were unable to read the license plate. Griff believes the group involved in a disagreement with George murdered him, but the police have little evidence against them. Jimmy leaves the garage in tears, telling Griff to send him CCTV footage of the robbery. The next morning, Jimmy visits his parents' cemetery. Morgan, his wife, arrives at church while he is there. Morgan and Jimmy were on the verge of divorce before the catastrophe. Morgan claims he missed the funeral despite receiving 5 emails. However, when she realizes Jimmy is going through a difficult time, she consoles him by telling him that he does not have to be alone and that he is welcome to visit her flat at any time. The following day, Griff sets up a meeting with Jimmy and reveals that the black BMW belongs to Warren, his brother, who George accidentally killed that day, according to the inquiry. He then provides Jimmy with CCTV footage from the robbery. Someone rear-ends Warren's car as he exits the gym at night. He gets out of his car, only to find Jimmy waiting inside the car behind him, and begins slandering him. Jimmy, a special operations member, quickly overwhelms Warren and knocks him out. When Warren wakes up, he finds himself strapped to the front seat, with Jimmy spilling gasoline all over his vehicle. Jimmy reminds Warren of the couple he murdered 2 weeks ago, and Warren erupts in rage, insisting he did the right thing. Instead of expressing regret for his actions, Warren explains to Jimmy how he sexually assaulted Jimmy's mother that night. Keeping his emotions under control, Jimmy asks the bad guy to name his gang members in exchange for letting him go. After Warren writes down the names, Jimmy starts a cigarette and sets Warren on fire without mercy. Later, he makes his way to Morgan's house but is unable to speak for long owing to a stab wound. When Morgan stands up, he realizes something is wrong with him. When the woman notices the blood on his clothes, she brings him inside and patches the wounds. Despite the couple's imminent divorce, the incident brought them closer, leading Jimmy to spend the night at Morgan's apartment. Warren's death made headlines the next day, but everyone was aware of his drug peddling and criminal history. When Rob, one of the thugs, learns about the accident, he and Leon rush towards Warren's business partner, Caleb, whom they believe may have killed Warren due to a disagreement over percentages. The trio knocks on his door and confronts him. But Caleb has no idea what they're talking about. After his girlfriend saves him, Caleb disputes the claims and threatens Rob and Leon not to return to his block. At night, Griff pays Jimmy a visit and advises him not to punish the culprits alone. But, unlike Griff, Jimmy believes that the society's compromised system will never stop these gangsters, who influence practically every family in town. They merely take the statement and process it, whereas the perpetrators laugh and spit in their faces. Later, Griff arrives at the crime scene, witnessing the slaying of a man during an armed robbery. Griff finally sees the weaknesses in the police department. Chief Inspector Holland blatantly claims that the storekeeper should not have retaliated, disregarding the armed robbery and the victims. When Griff becomes agitated and claims that the man was protecting his livelihood, Holland tells him to take a chill pill. According to Holland, the man's wife will claim the insurance, receive a large sum, and everyone will be satisfied. Meanwhile, Jimmy continues the quest and moves on to the next member of the gang, Ryan. He takes him to an abandoned location, ties him to a chair, and applies a mouth cuff on his face. Jimmy's pursuit of vengeance consumes him, knowing all of the tortures that any special operations investigator would subject himself to. He pours cement into Ryan's mouth, causing him to swallow and choke to death. The following day, the police discover Ryan's body has solidified from the top to the stomach due to the cement. DCI Holland shows significant interest in the case and believes it has the potential to lead to a significant promotion. Following that, Terry, the bar owner, shows Holland CCTV footage of his establishment, where they can see Jimmy transporting a passed-out man in the back of his car. Despite Deb's advice not to show the film, Terry doesn't want his pub to burn down like George's home. When the police question Morgan about Jimmy, she lies, and Jimmy hides in her apartment. Later, Jimmy is from the store, and two police officers begin to follow him. A car abruptly stops just as they are ready to arrest him. Two imposing men emerge and assault the officers, allowing Jimmy to flee with them. Jimmy is shocked to see Colonel Leach exit the car. Jimmy is a crucial asset to special operations, so the colonel personally arrives to take him back. He offers Jimmy another 48 hours to clean up his mess, meaning that he must reconcile with the remaining gang members before returning to his employment. Griff, on the other hand, approaches his colleague, Joe, the SWAT leader, and informs him that this situation is not serious. Joe, suspicious, asks Griff if he knows who the killer is. Griff then confesses that he is a friend of Jimmy, who suffered the brutal death of his parents. As Joe persists in his belief that Jimmy is out of control, Griff asserts that Holland is not an exception, and he is solely focusing on this case to secure his position as superintendent, a position that is likely to devastate the department due to corruption and neglect. Returning to Jimmy, he proceeds with his retribution, secure in the knowledge of the Army's backing and impervious to capture. Seated in the strip club, Leon receives an envelope containing the image of the deceased Ryan. Fearing danger, the thug escapes from the club, sprinting until Jimmy pushes him down. After recovering consciousness, Leon discovers himself bound to the ground, with his lower body tied to the gate and his upper body to the car. The mystery surrounding Leon's torment only intensifies Jimmy's anger. As a result, Jimmy shows no mercy, getting inside the car and racing it at full speed, severing Leon in two halves. The next day, Colonel Leach stumbles into DCI Holland in a restaurant. He requests that Holland hand over all the files police have on Jimmy and declares that Jimmy belongs to the Army, not him. Upon hearing this, Holland declines, asserting that if the colonel enforces the law independently, he should face imprisonment. Colonel Leach then goes on to highlight Jimmy's bravery by recounting an incident from 2009. He claims that the Army apprehended the terrorist who planned a huge attack on the British mainland, but the terrorist refused to reveal any details about it. Jimmy only had to spend 10 minutes alone with the terrorist before he began to spill everything. He claims that people like Jimmy welcome death rather than fear it. Finally, he warns that Jimmy will finish off these guys and vanish into thin air. DCI Holland accepts the challenge and promises to find Jimmy. The colonel departs, cautioning Holland that he will face severe punishment if he ever touches Jimmy. The next scene depicts the police superintendent and commissioner of police meeting the Army head at short notice. The Army leader directly addresses the matter, asserting that detaining Jimmy, the focus of the ongoing investigation, is unacceptable under any circumstances. Without divulging much about Jimmy, The officials explain to the superintendents how important he is to Britain's top secret agencies. The army hierarchy requested that higher-ups and police report directly on the progress of this investigation. Later that night, a drug dealer leads the gang's only surviving member, Rob, who was part of the group that murdered Jimmy's parents, outside. Jimmy makes him knock on the door and uses him as a shield, but Rob departs the scene later. He kills the gang's remaining drug dealers, with the exception of Caleb, Warren's business partner. Jimmy ties him to the chair and stirs some chemicals in a bucket, the same chemicals used by dealers to make drugs. Jimmy then dissolves all of the cash in the bucket before pouring the chemical over the guy's head, melting him alive. Meanwhile, Holland discovers Constable Griffin has been providing Jimmy with information since the beginning, so he asks him who Jimmy is looking for next. Griffin, on the other hand, refuses to tell him and requests that he remain out of Jimmy's way, but Holland appears determined to find Jimmy and defies his superintendent's orders. He then locates the final gang member in the hospital who escaped the incident last night. The next scene shows the limping man in Jimmy's apartment, examining letters. Later, Jimmy tracks him down and forces him to drive near the dock. He makes the man sit on his knees with his hands tied and pulls out a syringe, claiming that it is the most lethal aerosol spray that will burn someone inside. Rob then spits on Jimmy and instructs him to check the trunk of his car. To his amazement, Rob has killed Morgan before Jimmy got to him. As Holland's SWAT team arrives on the scene, Jimmy, overcome with amazement and exhaustion, empties his gun magazine into Rob. Griff also appears, confronting Holland about releasing Rob from the hospital and allowing him to kill Jimmy's wife. Holland claims he let him go so the guy might lead him to Jimmy, but he had no idea he would kill his wife. Joe, the SWAT captain, notices Holland's reality and orders his squad to stand down, leaving Holland startled. They let a broken Jimmy leave the scene, while Holland tried to stop him alone. Before departing, Jimmy strikes Holland in the face, causing him to finally stop. The film concludes in an alley with a random woman putting out trash. Two strangers interfere and grab her as she pleads for help. Jimmy appears at the other end of the alleyway. The thugs confront Jimmy and beg him to leave, and Jimmy's cry fades into darkness with an ugly smirk. Thanks for watching. If you are new, don't forget to subscribe for more of these recaps. Until next time, have a nice day.